The Texas heat was unbearable that Saturday afternoon, but it wasn't the temperature that made my stomach clench as I tied my sneakers in our shared bedroom. It was the sound drifting up from the backyard, the laughter, the music, the celebration that had started without me. Again, I finished lacing my shoes and looked across the room at Adrian's bed, perfectly made with military precision. His soccer trophies lined the shelf above it, gleaming in the afternoon sun. Even though we were twins, born exactly 11 minutes apart, our parents had always treated our achievements differently. When I scored the winning goal in our middle school championship, Dad clapped politely and mentioned that Adrian had scored 2 goals in his game the previous week. When Adrian scored those same 2 goals, it was front page news in our household, phone calls to relatives, Facebook posts, a celebration dinner at his favorite restaurant. But nothing had prepared me for what I found when I stepped onto our back patio. The party was magnificent, red and blue streamers everywhere, matching tablecloths, a tower of perfectly wrapped presents. And in the center of it all, a 3-layer cake decorated with a soccer ball and Happy 13th Birthday, Adrian, written in bold letters. Just Adrian. I stood in the doorway, gripping the frame as I processed what I was seeing. Our birthday, our 13th birthday. But according to this celebration, only one of us was aging today. Adeline, Aunt Susan called out, waving from her chair in the shade, "Come get some cake, sweetie." She pointed to a corner of the picnic table where a small sheet cake sat, already partially cut. No decorations, no candles, no fanfare, just chocolate cake on paper plates, like an afterthought. "Here you go, honey," she said, pressing a plate into my hands. "Your mom made this one special for you." I wanted to ask why my name wasn't on the real cake. I wanted to know why Adrian got the 3-layer masterpiece while I got the backup dessert. Instead, I mumbled thank you and found an empty chair on the periphery of the celebration. Adrian was in his element, surrounded by relatives and family friends, opening presents with theatrical flair. Dad had given him a new set of cleats, the expensive kind I'd been asking for all season. Uncle Mike handed over a gift card to the sporting goods store. Aunt Lisa presented him with a new gaming system that made all his friends gasp with envy. Each gift came with enthusiastic praise for our future soccer star because boys need the best equipment. Our little champion deserves it. When it was time for photos, everyone gathered around Adrian and his beautiful cake. I started to join them, but Mom waved me back. "Let's get some good shots of the birthday boy first," she said, adjusting Adrian's hair. "We'll take family photos later." Later never came, ever. I sat on the porch swing, picking at my sheet cake and watching my twin brother command the attention of every adult in our backyard. We were both 13, but apparently only one of us was supposed to matter today. When Dad walked by with his beer, I stood up carefully. "Dad, why isn't my name on the cake?" He paused, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Don't start, Adeline. It's Adrian's day. Don't make this about you." That phrase again. Every time something wasn't equal, every time I pointed out the obvious favoritism, I was the one making it about myself. I was the problem for noticing, for caring, for existing in the shadow of my brother's golden light. "But it's my birthday, too," I said quietly. "And you got cake," Dad replied, gesturing toward my paper plate. "What more do you want? I want it to be seen. I want it to matter. I wanted someone to remember that I'd been born on this day, too, that I was growing up alongside my brother, that my existence was worth celebrating." Instead, I went back to my corner and watched Adrian blow out 13 candles while everyone sang his name. The only person who seemed to notice my absence from the festivities was Grandma Kate. She sat by the kitchen window, watching the chaos outside with knowing eyes. When I passed by her chair, she quietly slipped a $20 bill into my palm. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she whispered. "Don't let them make you small." It wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like everything. The rules in our house were simple but unspoken. Adrian was precious, and Adeline was responsible for keeping him that way. Boys are more fragile than they look. Mom explained when I was 8, and Adrian had come crying to her about a scraped knee he'd gotten while we were playing tag. They need their sisters to look out for them. I'd been the one to trip and skin both knees, but no one had rushed to comfort me. I'd cleaned my own wounds with paper towels and kept playing, but Adrian's single scrape required Band-Aids, antiseptic, and 20 minutes of cuddling on Mom's lap. "You need to be more careful around your brother," she continued, stroking his hair while he milked the attention. "He's smaller than you." This wasn't true. Adrian and I were exactly the same height and weight had been since birth. But somewhere along the way, our parents had decided he was delicate and I was dangerous, and no amount of evidence to the contrary seemed to matter. By the time we reached middle school, the pattern was deeply entrenched. When Adrian accidentally broke my art project the night before it was due, I was lectured about leaving my things where they could get damaged. When I pointed out that he'd thrown his backpack directly at my papier-mâché volcano, I was told not to blame my brother for my carelessness. "Boys don't always think before they act," Dad explained, ruffling Adrian's hair affectionately. "That's why they need patient sisters." But when I forgot to record a TV show Adrian wanted to watch, I was grounded for a week for being inconsiderate of others' needs. The double standard was as clear as it was maddening. But every time I tried to point it out, I was shut down with reminders about my responsibility to be the bigger person. "You're the girl," Mom would say, as if that explained everything. "Girls mature faster. We have to lead by example." So I learned to swallow my anger, to accept blame that wasn't mine, to protect a brother who seemed perfectly capable of protecting himself when it suited him. I learned that my job was to make Adrian look good, and his job was to let me. The first time he used this dynamic against me, I was too shocked to fight back. We were arguing about whose turn it was to take out the trash, a chore that somehow always became my responsibility despite our rotating schedule. Adrian had conveniently forgotten 3 weeks in a row, and I was tired of covering for him. "It's your turn," I said firmly, pointing to the calendar where our names were clearly marked. "I did it last week and the week before." "I'm not doing it," he replied, flopping onto the couch and grabbing the TV remote. "I've got practice in an hour." "So do I shot back. "And it's still your turn." "God, why are you being such a bitch about this?" he said, not even looking at me. The word hit me like a slap. We'd been raised not to use language like that, and I'd never heard Adrian direct it at anyone, let alone me. "What did you just call me?" "You heard me," he said, his voice getting louder. "You're being a total bitch. Just take out the stupid trash and stop nagging me about it." That's when Mom walked into the room. "What's all this yelling about?" she demanded, looking between us with exasperation. "Adeline's freaking out about the trash," Adrian said, his voice instantly shifting to wounded innocence. "I told her I'd do it after practice, but she started screaming at me." I stared at him in disbelief. "I wasn't screaming, and you called me I didn't call you anything," he interrupted, looking hurt. "I just asked if you could handle it this once since I'm already stressed about today's game." The lie was so smooth, so convincing, that for a moment I doubted my own memory. Had I misheard him? Had I been the one yelling, "Adeline"? Mom said, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Your brother has an important game today. The least you can do is help out without making a scene." "But it's his turn, and enough." She cut me off. "Take out the trash and stop harassing your brother. He's under enough pressure without you adding to it. I looked at Adrian, expecting him to correct the story, to admit what he'd actually said, to stand up for the truth. Instead, he gave me a small smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that said he'd just learned something very valuable about the power dynamics in our house. From that day forward, everything changed. Adrian was a quick study when it came to understanding his value in our family ecosystem. It started small, convenient memory lapses about whose turn it was to load the dishwasher, sudden illnesses that struck just before his scheduled chores, urgent homework emergencies that required my help to solve. Each time, our parents accepted his excuses without question and expected me to pick up the slack without complaint. "Your brother works so hard at soccer," Mom would say when I pointed out the growing imbalance. "The least we can do is support his dreams." But my dreams, my writing, my art, my plans for student government, those were hobbies, distractions from my real purpose of being Adrian's supporting cast. When I made honor roll 3 semesters in a row, the achievement was acknowledged with a brief good job and quickly overshadowed by Adrian's latest athletic accomplishment. When he made honor roll once, it was treated like a minor miracle worthy of celebration and reward. "See what happens when you apply yourself," Dad beamed, taking him out for ice cream. "We always knew you were smart. You just needed to focus." I'd been applying myself consistently for years, but somehow that made my achievements less impressive, not more. Excellence from me was expected. Excellence from Adrian was exceptional. The shift in his behavior was gradual but unmistakable. The brother who used to build blanket forts with me and share his Halloween candy began treating me like hired help. He'd bark orders from his room about bringing him snacks or finding his missing equipment, and when I refused, he'd complain to our parents about my attitude. "Adeline's being really mean to me," he'd say, putting on the wounded expression that never failed to get results. "I just asked her to help me find my cleats, and she said she was too busy." Never mind that I'd been doing homework for 3 hours while he played video games. Never mind that his cleats were exactly where he'd left them under a pile of dirty laundry he expected me to wash for him. Never mind that helping had become a one-way street that always led to me doing things for him while he contributed nothing in return. "Adeline," Dad would call from the living room, "go help your brother find his equipment and check your attitude while you're at it." The phrase, "check your attitude," became the soundtrack of my adolescence. I says. Whenever I questioned the inequity, whenever I pointed out Adrian's increasing dependence on my labor, whenever I suggested he might be capable of taking care of himself, I was the one with the attitude problem. Adrian learned to weaponize this dynamic with surgical precision. If he wanted the last piece of pizza, I was being selfish for not sharing. If he needed help with homework, I was being stuck up for suggesting he figure it out himself. If he broke something of mine, I was being materialistic for caring about stupid stuff, and our parents bought every word of it. Boys show love differently. Mom explained when I complained about Adrian's increasing disrespect. "He doesn't mean to hurt your feelings. He just doesn't express himself the same way girls do." But girls, apparently, were expected to express themselves with endless patience, selfless service, and grateful acceptance of whatever crumbs of attention their brothers chose to share. The worst part wasn't the inequality itself. It was watching Adrian transform from the sweet boy who used to make me friendship bracelets into someone who genuinely believed he deserved special treatment simply by virtue of being male. By the time we turned 14, he'd learned to expect doors to be opened for him, problems to be solved for him, consequences to be absorbed by others. He'd learned that his comfort mattered more than my convenience. His time was more valuable than mine. His dreams were worth sacrificing for. He'd learned that being a boy in our family meant never having to say you're sorry, because someone else would always be there to take the blame. And I was starting to realize that someone would always be me. The bruise on Adrian's shoulder appeared on a Monday morning in March, perfectly positioned where his soccer jersey would hide it during school, but visible enough to catch Mom's attention when he changed clothes at home. "What happened to you?" she gasped, examining the purple mark with maternal concern. Adrian glanced at me across the breakfast table, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Calculation, opportunity, the birth of an idea that would change everything between us. "It's nothing," he said, but his voice carried just enough reluctance to suggest there was definitely something. "I don't want to get anyone in trouble." The phrase was perfectly calibrated to guarantee more questions. Mom immediately sat down beside him, her protective instincts fully activated. "Sweetheart, if someone hurt you, we need to know about it." "It was an accident," he said, still looking at me with those calculating eyes. Adeline didn't mean to do it. She was just really angry about something. The words hit me like a physical blow. I set down my orange juice so hard it sloshed across the table. "I didn't touch you," I said, my voice sharp with shock and indignation. "I haven't been anywhere near you." "See?" Adrian said, his voice getting smaller, more vulnerable. "She's getting angry again, just like last night." "Last night?" Mom's voice was rising with concern. "What happened last night?" I stared at my brother, trying to understand what was happening. The previous evening had been completely ordinary homework. Dinner, TV, bed. We'd barely spoken to each other, let alone fought. "I asked her to help me with my math homework," Adrian continued, his story gaining momentum with each word. "She said she was too busy, and when I asked again, she got really mad. She grabbed my shoulder and pushed me away from her desk." The lie was so detailed, so specific, that for a moment I questioned my own memory. Had I pushed him? Had there been an argument I'd somehow forgotten? "That didn't happen," I said, but my voice sounded uncertain even to my own ears. "You were really stressed about your English essay," Adrian said, looking at me with what appeared to be genuine concern. "I don't think you realized how hard you grabbed me. You were just frustrated." The genius of it was in the reasonableness of the explanation. I had been working on an English essay. I was often stressed about schoolwork. It was plausible that I might have been short with him, might have been rougher than intended. Except none of it had happened. "I need you both to sit down and talk this through," Mom said, her voice carrying the weight of parental authority. "Adrian, show me exactly what happened." What followed was a performance worthy of a school play. Adrian demonstrated how he'd approached my desk, how he'd asked for help with careful politeness, how I'd allegedly snapped at him and shoved him away with unnecessary force. "It happened really fast," he said, rubbing his shoulder for emphasis. "I don't think she meant to hurt me. She was just really mad about her essay being due." I watched this theater in stunned silence, marveling at the details he was creating in real time. The way he flinched slightly when describing the push, the careful way he defended my intentions while making my actions sound inexcusable, the hurt expression that suggested deep betrayal beneath his generous forgiveness. "Adeline," Mom said, turning to me with disappointment written across her face, "is this how it happened?" I opened my mouth to deny it again, but the words stuck in my throat. How do you prove something didn't happen? How do you argue against a story that sounded plausible to everyone but you? "I didn't push him," I said weakly. "I didn't even talk to him last night." "Sweetheart," Mom's voice was gentle but firm, "your brother wouldn't lie about something like this. And look at that bruise that doesn't just appear by itself." She was right about the bruise. It was real, visible, undeniable evidence that something had happened to Adrian's shoulder. The only question was what had caused it. Maybe you don't remember, Adrian suggested helpfully. You were really focused on your work. Sometimes when people are stressed, they don't realize their own strength. The suggestion that I'd been so angry, so out of control, that I'd hurt my brother without even remembering it was terrifying. Was it possible? Had I become the kind of person who lashed out physically when frustrated? I want you to apologize to your brother, Mom said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. And I want you to think about better ways to handle your stress that don't involve taking it out on family members. I looked at Adrian, sitting there with his perfectly crafted expression of hurt forgiveness, and felt something die inside my chest. This was my brother, my twin, the person who had shared a womb with me and grown up alongside me for 14 years. And he was lying about me with such skill that even I was starting to doubt myself. I'm sorry, I whispered, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. Adrian smiled and reached across the table to pat my hand. It's okay, Addie. I know you didn't mean it. But the smile didn't reach his eyes, and I knew this was just the beginning. The second incident happened 2 weeks later, and this time Adrian was ready with witnesses. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when he walked in with his friend Tyler, both of them sweaty from soccer practice in the backyard. They were laughing about something, their voices loud and boisterous in the way that 14-year-old boys specialized in. Hey, can you make me one too? Adrian asked, gesturing toward my sandwich. Make your own, I replied without looking up from spreading peanut butter. Your hands aren't broken. It was a normal sibling interaction, the kind of mild snark that happened in every household across America. But Adrian's response was anything but normal. Ow! He yelped suddenly, stumbling backward into Tyler. Adeline, that hurt. I spun around, confused. What hurt? I didn't touch you. You elbowed me in the ribs, he said, his voice loud enough to carry throughout the house. Why are you being so aggressive? Tyler was staring at both of us with wide eyes, clearly uncomfortable with being caught in the middle of a family dispute, but his presence was exactly what Adrian had been counting on. I didn't elbow you, I said, my voice rising with frustration. I've been standing right here making a sandwich. I haven't moved. She's been really angry lately, Adrian said to Tyler, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that I was obviously meant to overhear. Ever since that thing with her grades, she's been taking it out on everyone. There had been no thing with my grades. I was maintaining my usual A average, just like I had since elementary school. But Tyler didn't know that, and Adrian was banking on the assumption that his friend would believe him over me. Dude, that's not cool, Tyler said, looking at me with something between concern and judgment. You shouldn't hit your brother. I didn't hit him, I protested, but I could hear how defensive I sounded, how guilty my denial appeared to outside ears. That's when Mom appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. What's going on in here? Adeline elbowed me when I asked her to make me a sandwich, Adrian said, his voice carrying just the right blend of hurt and confusion. I don't know why she's so mad all the time. Tyler nodded gravely. I saw it happen, Mrs. Race. She totally hit him for no reason. I stared at Tyler in shock. He hadn't seen anything because nothing had happened. But somehow, in the span of 30 seconds, he'd become convinced that he'd witnessed an assault that had never occurred. Tyler, you were looking at the refrigerator, I said desperately. You weren't even watching us. I saw you elbow him, Tyler insisted, his teenage certainty absolute. Right in the ribs. He doubled over and everything. The reality of what was happening hit me like a truck. Adrian had somehow convinced his friend to lie for him. Or maybe he'd simply created a moment of confusion that Tyler's brain had filled in with false details. Either way, I was now facing two witnesses who swore they'd seen me assault my brother. Adeline. Mom's voice was sharp with disappointment, and something else, something that looked dangerously close to fear. Go to your room, now. But I didn't, now. I spent the rest of the afternoon locked in my bedroom, listening to the murmur of voices downstairs as Mom called Dad at work to discuss their daughter's escalating violent behavior. Through my door, I could hear Adrian being comforted, Tyler being thanked for his honesty, and plans being made for getting Adeline the help she needs. When Dad came home that evening, he didn't ask for my side of the story. He didn't question the timeline or ask for details about what had supposedly happened. He simply knocked on my door and informed me that I was grounded indefinitely and would be starting anger management counseling the following week. We can't have you hurting your brother, he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. This behavior has to stop before someone gets seriously injured. I didn't hurt him, I said for what felt like the 100th time that day. Nothing happened. Son, Dad's voice was gentle but firm. Tyler saw what you did. Your brother has the marks to prove it. Denying it isn't going to help anyone, especially you. I looked down at my hands, hands that had never struck another person in anger, hands that were apparently now weapons in my family's eyes. When had I become dangerous? When had self-defense become aggression? When had my word become worthless compared to my brother's? That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how my life had shifted so dramatically in the span of two incidents. 2 weeks ago, I'd been an honor student with a clean disciplinary record. Now I was a violent offender in need of professional intervention. And Adrian, the architect of this transformation, was sleeping peacefully in the bed across from mine, probably already planning his next performance. By the time spring arrived, Adrian had perfected his craft. The incidents came with calculated frequency, just often enough to establish a pattern, but not so often that they seemed suspicious. A mysterious bruise on his arm after I'd allegedly grabbed him during an argument about household chores. Scratches on his back that he claimed came from me pushing him into the doorframe. A cut on his lip that he attributed to my throwing a book at him during what he described as one of my episodes. Each accusation was supported by carefully constructed evidence. Witnesses who had been looking the other way, but somehow remembered seeing exactly what Adrian needed them to see. Physical marks that appeared at convenient times and in perfect locations to support his narrative. Detailed stories that evolved with each retelling, gaining complexity and emotional weight. Our parents' responses became increasingly dramatic with each incident. The anger management counseling escalated to individual therapy sessions with Dr. Morrison, a kind but thoroughly misguided psychologist who spent our weekly meetings trying to help me understand my triggers and develop healthy coping mechanisms for my apparently explosive temper. Violence is never an acceptable way to express frustration, Dr. Morrison would say, her voice gentle but firm. Let's talk about what you were feeling right before you hurt your brother. I didn't hurt him, I would reply, the words feeling more hollow each time I said them. Denial is a common response to guilt. She would explain patiently. It's easier to convince ourselves that something didn't happen than to face the reality of our actions. The therapy sessions were supposed to help me, but they felt more like trials where I was repeatedly convicted of crimes I hadn't committed. Every week, I was presented with new evidence of my violence, new testimony from family members who had witnessed my aggression, new theories about what was causing my behavioral problems. Meanwhile, Adrian's reputation as the long-suffering victim grew stronger with each incident. Teachers at school began checking in with him regularly, asking if things were okay at home. His soccer coach pulled him aside to discuss how family stress might be affecting his performance. Even our extended family started treating him with the special care reserved for trauma survivors. Poor Adrian, Aunt Susan whispered to Mom during a family barbecue, glancing meaningfully in my direction. It must be so hard living with all that tension. I was sitting 10 feet away, well within hearing distance, but no one seemed to care about the impact their conversations might have on me. I had become the problem to be managed, not a person to be considered. The isolation was almost worse than the accusations themselves. Friends started avoiding me after word spread about my issues at home. Teachers began watching me more carefully, looking for signs of the aggression that everyone seemed convinced was lurking just beneath the surface. Even relatives started treating me differently, not quite afraid, but cautious, like I might explode at any moment. You need to work harder on controlling your temper, Mom said during one of our increasingly frequent family meetings about my behavior. Your actions are affecting everyone in this house. What actions? I asked desperately. What have I actually done? Don't play dumb. Add a line, Dad replied, his patience clearly exhausted. We have documentation of multiple incidents. We have witnesses. We have physical evidence. At some point, you need to take responsibility for your choices. But that was exactly the problem. I couldn't take responsibility for choices I hadn't made. I couldn't apologize for actions I hadn't taken. I couldn't promise to do better when I hadn't done anything wrong in the first place. The gaslighting was so complete, so systematic, that I began to question my own sanity. Maybe I was having blackouts. Maybe I was so angry that I was blocking out my own violent episodes. Maybe everyone else was right, and I was the only one who couldn't see the truth about myself. Adrian, meanwhile, had become a master of public relations. He spoke about our difficult relationship with the perfect blend of sadness and hope, positioning himself as the loyal brother who refused to give up on his troubled sister. I know she doesn't mean to hurt me, he would tell concerned adults, his voice heavy with false maturity. She's just going through a really hard time right now. I'm trying to be patient with her. The performance was so convincing that even I sometimes found myself believing it. Maybe I was going through a hard time. Maybe I was taking out my frustrations on him unfairly. Maybe his patience and forgiveness were exactly what I deserved for being such a burden on our family. By my 15th birthday, another celebration where my cake was an afterthought, and Adrian's was the centerpiece, I had been completely isolated from any source of support or validation. I was the problem child, the violent daughter, the sister who couldn't control her anger. And Adrian was the golden boy who had learned that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't strength, it's the ability to convince everyone that you're the one who needs protection. The final incident that led to my exile happened on a Tuesday in early May, and for the first time, I almost understood why everyone believed Adrian's stories. I was exhausted physically, emotionally, spiritually drained from months of being accused, analyzed, and medicated for problems I didn't have. Dr. Morrison had convinced my parents to try me on anxiety medication, convinced that my aggressive episodes were symptoms of an underlying panic disorder. The pills made me foggy and slow, like I was viewing the world through cloudy water. Simple tasks became overwhelming. Concentrating in school was nearly impossible. Even basic conversations felt like they required more energy than I possessed. The medication needs time to work. Dr. Morrison assured my parents when they expressed concern about my zombie-like state. Some initial drowsiness is normal as her system adjusts. But the drowsiness wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how the medication seemed to confirm everyone's belief that there was something fundamentally wrong with me. If I needed psychiatric drugs to function normally, Then clearly I had been as disturbed as everyone claimed. Adrian watched my deterioration with what appeared to be genuine concern, but I caught him smiling when he thought no one was looking. He had won so completely that even my own brain chemistry was now working against me. That Tuesday afternoon, I came home from school to find him in our shared bedroom, going through my desk drawers with casual confidence. "What are you doing?" I asked, my medicated brain struggling to process what I was seeing. "Looking for my calculator," he said without looking up. "You borrowed it last week." This was a lie. I had my own calculator, and I'd never borrowed his. But in my current state, I couldn't muster the energy to argue about it. "It's not in there," I said, sitting heavily on my bed. "Check your backpack." "I already did," he replied, continuing to rifle through my personal belongings. "You probably lost it, just like you lost my soccer jersey last month." Another lie. I'd never borrowed his jersey either. But the medication made everything feel uncertain. Like maybe I was forgetting things. Maybe I was more careless than I realized. "Please stop going through my stuff," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "God, why are you always so paranoid?" Adrian snapped, finally turning to face me. "I'm not stealing anything. I'm just looking for my calculator that you lost." The unfairness of it, the casual way he was violating my privacy while accusing me of theft, finally broke something inside me. For the first time in months, I felt a flash of genuine anger cut through the pharmaceutical haze. "I didn't lose your calculator because I never borrowed it," I said, standing up with more energy than I'd felt in weeks. "And I didn't lose your jersey because I never borrowed that either. Stop making up stories about me." Adrian's eyes lit up with opportunity. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, genuine emotion from me, real anger that could be twisted into evidence of my instability. "See," he said, his voice getting louder. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You get so defensive whenever anyone questions you about anything." "I'm not being defensive," I protested, but I could hear how my voice was rising. "I'm being accurate." "You're being crazy," he shot back. "Just like always." The word crazy hit me like a slap. It was the label I'd been fighting against for months, the diagnosis that everyone seemed eager to pin on me. Hearing it from my own brother's mouth was devastating. "I'm not crazy," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm tired of being blamed for things I didn't do." "Right," Adrian said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Nothing is ever your fault. Everyone else is just lying about you for no reason." That's when I made the mistake that would cost me everything. I stepped toward him not to hurt him, not to threaten him, but to close the distance between us so I could speak more quietly. The medication made me unsteady, and I stumbled slightly, reaching out to catch myself on his dresser. My hand brushed against his arm as I steadied myself, the lightest possible contact, barely enough to qualify as touch, but Adrian reacted like I'd struck him with a baseball bat. "Ow!" he screamed, stumbling backward and clutching his arm. "She hit me! Mom! Dad, Adeline hit me!" "I didn't hit you," I said, staring at him in shock. "I barely touched you." "You punched me in the arm," he yelled, his voice carrying throughout the house. "She's having another episode." Within seconds, both parents were in our room, followed by the sound of sirens in the distance. Someone, Adrian, I realized, had called 911 while I'd been in the bathroom washing my face. "What happened?" Mom demanded, looking between us with panic in her eyes. "She attacked me," Adrian said, still clutching his arm dramatically. "I was just looking for my calculator, and she went crazy. She started screaming, and then she punched me." I touched his arm when I was catching myself from stumbling, I said, but my words sounded weak and unconvincing even to my own ears. "I didn't punch anyone. You were yelling at me," Adrian insisted, calling me a liar, saying I was making up stories. Then you came at me and hit me. The paramedics arrived while we were still arguing. They examined Adrian's arm, which showed no signs of injury, but dutifully documented his complaint and my parents' concerns about my history of violence. We think she needs to be evaluated, Dad told them, his voice heavy with defeat. This has been escalating for months, and we're afraid someone's going to get seriously hurt. What followed was the most humiliating experience of my life. I was handcuffed, and taken to the emergency room for a psychiatric evaluation. The medication in my system, combined with my obvious distress, convinced the doctor that I was indeed having some kind of mental health crisis. I spent 72 hours in a psychiatric hold, subjected to interviews, assessments, and medications that made me feel even more disconnected from reality. When I was finally released, it was with a diagnosis of adjustment disorder with aggressive features and a recommendation for residential treatment. We think it would be best if you stayed with your grandmother for a while, Mom said when she picked me up from the hospital, just until we can get this situation under control. Adrian wasn't in the car. He was at soccer practice, living his normal life while mine fell apart around me. For how long? I asked. Mom's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Until you can figure out how to be part of this family without hurting people. Then Grandma Kate's house in East Austin was small but peaceful, a haven where the rules made sense and accusations weren't accepted without evidence. Your parents say you've been having some trouble, she said gently as she helped me unpack my single suitcase. Want to tell me your side of the story? For the first time in months, someone was asking for my perspective rather than telling me what had happened. The relief was so overwhelming that I broke down completely, sobbing out the whole story between gasps for air. Grandma listened without interruption, her weathered hands stroking my hair while I described the systematic campaign Adrian had waged against me. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. That boy always was too clever for his own good, she said finally. Even as a little thing, he knew exactly which buttons to push to get what he wanted. You believe me? I asked, hardly daring to hope. Honey, I've been watching that family dynamic for 15 years, she replied. I've seen how they treat you different from him, and I've seen how he's learned to use that to his advantage. The validation was like oxygen to someone who'd been suffocating. For the first time in months, I wasn't crazy. I wasn't violent. I wasn't the problem. Why didn't you ever say anything? I asked. Grandma sighed deeply. Because I'm just the mother-in-law. Your parents would have written me off as a meddling old woman who doesn't understand modern child rearing, but I should have tried harder. I should have protected you. Living with Grandma was like stepping into an alternate universe where my existence had value. She came to my soccer games when I made the JV team at my new school. She helped me with college applications. She celebrated my achievements without immediately comparing them to Adrian's. You know, she said one evening as I struggled with calculus homework, your worth isn't determined by how well you can manage other people's emotions. You don't have to earn love by being perfect. It was a revelation that took months to fully absorb. I'd spent so many years trying to be good enough, quiet enough, accommodating enough to deserve basic respect that I'd forgotten it was supposed to be freely given. Meanwhile, my old life continued without me. Mom called occasionally to check in, but the conversations were stilted and brief. Dad never called at all. Adrian sent exactly one text message. Hope you're getting the help you need. The message was perfectly crafted to sound supportive while reinforcing the narrative that I was the one with problems. Even in my absence, he was still controlling the story. But distance gave me clarity, away from the constant gaslighting and manipulation. I could see the patterns clearly. Adrian had systematically isolated me from support, turned my own family against me, and convinced everyone that his calculated cruelty was actually victimhood. He'd learned to weaponize his gender in the most insidious way possible, not through obvious aggression, but through the subtle manipulation of a system that was already predisposed to protect him and control me. High school passed in a blur of academic focus and careful emotional management. I threw myself into studies, athletics, and college preparation with the intensity of someone who knew she had no safety net to fall back on. My new school knew nothing of my supposed history of violence, and without that narrative hanging over me, I discovered I was actually quite popular. Teachers praised my work ethic. Teammates respected my dedication. Friends appreciated my loyalty and sense of humor. It was strange to realize that the aggressive, unstable person my family had diagnosed didn't exist outside their interpretation of me. I graduated valedictorian and earned a full scholarship to UT Austin. When I called to share the news, Mom's response was lukewarm at best. "That's nice, honey," she said, her voice distracted. "Adrian just got recruited by 3 different colleges for soccer. We're so proud." Of course they were. Adrian's achievements were always more impressive, more worthy of celebration, more deserving of the family's attention and resources. I didn't attend my high school graduation. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing my parents pretend to be proud while Adrian basked in the attention that should have been shared. Instead, Grandma Kate and I had our own celebration dinner at my favorite restaurant and a movie marathon featuring all the films Adrian had always dismissed as stupid girl stuff. College was freedom in the truest sense. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who knew nothing of my supposed past and had no investment in maintaining false narratives about my character. I majored in psychology and women's studies, drawn to understanding the systems that had nearly destroyed me. I wrote my senior thesis on family scapegoating dynamics and the role of gender in sibling abuse. The research was both healing and horrifying healing because it validated my experience, horrifying because it revealed how common it was. Male siblings who engage in systematic psychological abuse often do so because they've learned that society will automatically question their sister's credibility. I wrote in my conclusion, "The intersection of gender bias and family dysfunction creates a perfect storm where boys can abuse girls with impunity, secure in the knowledge that their victims will be blamed for their own victimization." My thesis advisor, Dr. Elizabeth Manning, was the first adult to ever tell me that what I'd experienced had a name. "You were the family scapegoat," she explained during our final meeting. "It's a form of psychological abuse where one child becomes the repository for all the family's dysfunction. In families with both male and female children, it's disproportionately the girls who end up in this role." Why? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Because society teaches us that boys' emotions are more valid, their comfort more important, their potential more valuable," she replied. Families unconsciously replicate these biases, creating systems where boys are protected and girls are sacrificed. The conversation crystallized something I'd been struggling to articulate for years. Adrian hadn't just been cruel, he'd been strategic. He'd instinctively understood that our culture would side with him over me, and he'd exploited that knowledge with ruthless efficiency. I was 25 and working as a family counselor in Denver when I first heard about Adrian's troubles. Grandma Kate called on a Thursday evening, her voice heavy with something that sounded almost like satisfaction. "Your brother's wife left him," she said without preamble. "Took their little girl and filed for divorce. Restraining order, too." I set down my dinner and tried to process this information. What happened? From what I hear, She got tired of being blamed for every problem in their marriage, said he was manipulative and controlling, made her feel crazy all the time. The description was chillingly familiar. I thought of Adrian's high school girlfriend, Jessica, who had broken up with him after 6 months, claiming he was too intense, his college girlfriend, Sarah, who transferred schools to get away from him. The pattern had been there all along, but I'd been too young and too damaged to recognize it. There's more, Grandma continued. The little girl, Emma, she's been having nightmares. Doesn't want to go to Daddy's house for visitation. The therapist thinks something's been going on there, too. My blood ran cold. What kind of something? Nothing physical, but the child keeps saying Daddy tells her that Mommy is mean and lying about him. Says he makes her keep secrets about their conversations. Classic manipulation tactics. I closed my eyes and saw myself at 15, being convinced that I was the problem while Adrian systematically dismantled my sense of reality. Now he was doing the same thing to his own daughter, teaching her to doubt her perceptions and blame herself for his emotional abuse. Where are our parents in all this? I asked, standing by their golden boy, naturally. Grandma replied with disgust. They've hired him a lawyer and are telling anyone who'll listen that his ex-wife is just vindictive. Same playbook they used with you. But this time, the playbook wasn't working. Adrian's ex-wife, Lisa, had documentation. She'd kept a journal of his manipulative behaviors, recorded some of their conversations, and most importantly, she had a therapist who recognized the patterns of psychological abuse. The family court judge wasn't impressed by character witnesses who insisted Adrian was a good boy who would never hurt anyone. The evidence spoke for itself, a pattern of emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and the systematic erosion of his wife's mental health. Adrian's visitation with his daughter was limited to supervised visits pending a psychological evaluation. For the first time in his life, being charming and convincing wasn't enough to overcome the weight of documented evidence. Part of me feels sorry for him, I told my own therapist during our session that week. He never learned how to have healthy relationships because he was always rewarded for manipulation. And part of you, Dr. Rodriguez prompted gently. Part of me thinks he's finally facing consequences for the person he chose to become, I admitted. Maybe if someone had held him accountable earlier, he wouldn't have become someone capable of psychologically abusing his own child. The call came on a Sunday morning in March. I almost didn't answer calls from Texas numbers, usually meant family drama I wasn't ready to handle, but something made me pick up. Adeline. The voice was familiar but strained, aged beyond its years. It's Adrian. I hadn't spoken to my brother in 7 years. The last contact had been a brief, awkward conversation at Grandma Kate's funeral, where he'd offered perfunctory condolences while our parents looked on disapprovingly. What do you want? I asked, cutting straight to the point. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice breaking slightly. About everything, about what I did to you. I was silent for a long moment, trying to process this development. What brought this on? My daughter, he said simply. Emma, she's 6 years old, and she's starting to act like you used to act around me. Scared, careful, always trying to figure out what I want her to say. The admission hit me like a physical blow. Adrian, if you're hurting that child, I'm not, he interrupted quickly. Not physically, but I see myself doing the same things to her that I did to you, making her responsible for my emotions, making her feel like everything is her fault. And I can't let her grow up the way you did. For 30 years, I'd waited for some acknowledgement of what he'd put me through, some recognition that the family narrative about my supposed violence and instability had been built on lies. some admission that he'd systematically destroyed my childhood for his own benefit. Now here it was, delivered with the desperate urgency of a man who finally understood the monster he'd become. I want to make things right, he continued when I didn't respond. I know I can't undo what I did, but I need you to know that I remember everything. Every lie I told, every bruise I faked, every time I made you look crazy to cover for my own cruelty. And I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. Adeline. The apology I dreamed of for decades felt hollow when it finally came. Sorry wouldn't give me back my adolescence. Sorry wouldn't repair my relationship with our parents. Sorry wouldn't erase the years of therapy I'd needed to rebuild my sense of self. But sorry was a start. What do you want from me? I asked. Help, he said simply. I'm in therapy, but I need to understand how my actions affected you so I can make sure I never do them to Emma. I need to hear your side of the story, the real version, not the one I manufactured. We agreed to meet in Austin the following month. The conversation would take place in my therapist's office, with Dr. Rodriguez facilitating to ensure the discussion remained productive rather than destructive. When Adrian walked into that office, I barely recognized him. The confident golden boy of our childhood had been replaced by a hollow-eyed man who carried himself like someone bearing an enormous weight. For 3 hours, I told him what his manipulation had cost me. The years of questioning my own sanity, the destroyed relationships with our parents, the struggles with self-worth and trust that had followed me into adulthood. He listened without defending himself, without minimizing my experience, without trying to explain away his actions. When I finished, he was crying. I turned you into the villain so I could be the hero, he said quietly. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I did it anyway because it felt like power. Why? I asked. Why was hurting me worth it? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Because you were better than me at everything that mattered, he said finally. Smarter, more creative, more genuinely kind. And instead of trying to improve myself, I decided to tear you down so I could feel superior. The admission was both validating and heartbreaking. All those years, I'd wondered what I'd done wrong, what fundamental flaw in my character had made me deserving of such treatment. The answer was nothing. I'd been destroyed not because I was flawed, but because I was threatening to someone who couldn't handle being less than perfect. Adrian's journey toward accountability was painful and public. He started therapy with a specialist in family systems and emotional abuse. He wrote letters to our parents, detailing his manipulative behaviors and explaining how they'd enabled his treatment of me. He reached out to his ex-wife to acknowledge the psychological damage he'd inflicted on their marriage. Most importantly, he began the process of learning how to be a father without being a manipulator. I have to catch myself constantly, he told me during one of our monthly phone calls. When Emma spills something, my first instinct is to ask her why she's so careless. When she cries, I want to tell her she's being too sensitive. I have to actively work against every parenting instinct I inherited. The work was grueling, but the results spoke for themselves. His supervised visitations with Emma gradually expanded as court-appointed monitors noted his improved communication patterns. His daughter began to relax around him, no longer walking on eggshells or apologizing for normal childhood behaviors. But the changes in Adrian came at a cost to his relationship with our parents. When he finally told them the truth about our childhood, admitting to the fake injuries, the manufactured conflicts, the systematic campaign to paint me as violent, they reacted with the same denial and defensiveness they'd shown when I'd tried to tell my side of the story decades earlier. You're just saying this because you're angry about the divorce, Mom accused during what would be their final conversation for several years. You're trying to blame us for your problems instead of taking responsibility. I am taking responsibility, Adrian replied, his voice steady despite their hostility. I'm taking responsibility for what I did to Adeline, and I'm asking you to take responsibility for enabling it. But our parents weren't ready for that level of self-reflection. Acknowledging Adrian's manipulation would have meant acknowledging their own failures as parents, their own biases and blind spots, their own role in destroying one child to protect another. It was easier to write off Adrian's confessions as the desperate lies of a man trying to avoid accountability for his failed marriage. They've disowned me, he told me after they cut off contact. Said I'm not welcome in their house until I stop spreading lies about the family. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The golden boy, who had once been protected at all costs, was now experiencing the exile that had been my reality for 20 years. How does it feel? I asked, not unkindly. Terrible, he admitted. And deserved. I can't imagine how you survived it at 15. I almost didn't, I told him honestly. There were nights when I seriously considered whether everyone would be better off if I just disappeared. The weight of that confession settled between us. For the first time, Adrian fully understood the cost of his childhood cruelty, not just the inconvenience or embarrassment, but the genuine threat to my survival that his actions had created. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure Emma never feels that way, he said quietly. And if I can't undo what I did to you, at least I can make sure the cycle stops with me. 2 years after Adrian's confession, our family landscape had shifted entirely. Our parents maintained their silence, unwilling to confront the truth about their role in our family's dysfunction. They saw Emma occasionally during Adrian's supervised visits, but even those interactions were strained. Their granddaughter's obvious fear of raised voices and conflict made it impossible to ignore the trauma that had been passed down through generations. Adrian and I developed something that resembled a relationship, not the close bond we might have had in a healthier childhood, but a cautious partnership built on truth and accountability. We spoke regularly about parenting, about breaking cycles of abuse, about the ongoing work of healing from family trauma. Emma asked me why she doesn't have aunts and uncles like her friends do. He told me during one call. I didn't know how to explain that Daddy hurt people so badly, they don't want to be around us anymore. You could start with an age-appropriate version of the truth, I suggested. That sometimes adults make mistakes that hurt their families, and it takes time to make things right. Do you think you'll ever want to meet her? He asked hesitantly. I understand if you don't, but she knows she has an aunt somewhere, and she's curious. I'd been thinking about this possibility for months. Emma was innocent of her father's crimes, and she was growing up in the shadow of family secrets she didn't understand. Maybe she deserved better than the isolation that had defined my own childhood. Maybe, I said, but it would have to be on my terms, with clear boundaries about what kind of relationship I'm willing to have. The meeting was arranged for a neutral location, a children's museum in Austin, where Emma could play while Adrian and I talked. I was nervous driving there, uncertain what to expect from a 6-year-old who carried her father's DNA, but hopefully not his pathology. Emma was small for her age, with dark hair and serious eyes that reminded me uncomfortably of Adrian at that age. But where he had been calculating and manipulative, she seemed genuinely curious and kind. Are you really my daddy's sister? She asked, studying my face intently. Yes, I replied. We grew up together a long time ago. Daddy says he wasn't very nice to you when you were kids, she said with the matter-of-fact honesty that only children possessed. He says that's why you live far away. I glanced at Adrian, who was watching our interaction with careful attention. That's right, I told Emma. Sometimes people need space to heal from hurt feelings. But you're talking to him now, she observed. Does that mean the hurt feelings are better? The question was more complex than she realized, but her childlike logic demanded a simple answer. Some of them are better, I said, and some of them are still healing. But your daddy is working very hard to be a better person, which helps. Emma nodded solemnly and returned to her puzzle, apparently satisfied with this explanation. Later, as we walked through the museum, she slipped her small hand into mine with the easy trust that children show adults they instinctively feel safe with. The gesture was both heartwarming and heartbreaking, this innocent child reaching out for connection, while her father watched with the awareness of what his own childhood manipulation had cost. She's beautiful, I told Adrian as we prepared to leave, and she seems happy. She is, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm determined to make sure she stays that way. 5 years after our reconciliation, Adrian called with news that would test everything we'd built together. Lisa is getting remarried, he said, his voice carefully controlled. To a good guy, a pediatrician who's great with Emma, but they want to move to Portland for his job. I could hear the fear underneath his calm tone. Emma was the center of his world now, the motivation for all his healing work. The thought of losing regular contact with her was devastating. What does that mean for your visitation? I asked. Probably summers and holidays, if I'm lucky, he replied. Lisa says she'll support continued contact as long as I keep up with therapy and maintain my progress. But Portland is expensive, and my job here barely covers child support as it is. The old Adrian would have manipulated this situation, played the victim, turned Emma against her mother, used whatever leverage he could find to maintain control. The new Adrian was trying to navigate it with honesty and Emma's best interest at heart. What does Emma want? I asked. She wants to go, he admitted. She's excited about the move, about having a stepdad who teaches her science experiments and doesn't get angry when she spills things. I can't compete with that, and I shouldn't try. The growth in that statement was remarkable. The brother who had once demanded all attention was now willingly stepping aside for his daughter's happiness. But the situation also presented an opportunity I'd been considering for months. What if you moved to Portland too? I suggested. I've been thinking about relocating anyway. My practice here is stable, but I miss having mountains nearby. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. You do that, move across the country to help me stay close to Emma. I'd do it for Emma, I clarified, and for the chance to be part of a family that actually functions. But yes, I'd consider it. The move took 6 months to coordinate. I found a position with a family therapy practice in Portland that specialized in trauma recovery. Adrian transferred with his company and found an apartment within walking distance of Emma's new school. Our parents were informed of the move through a brief email. They didn't respond. Emma was thrilled to have both her father and her newly discovered aunt in the same city. The three of us began having weekly dinners, nothing fancy, just pizza and homework help and the kind of ordinary family time that none of us had experienced growing up. Aunt Adeline, do you think Daddy was mean to you because his feelings were hurt? Emma asked one evening with the penetrating curiosity of an 8-year-old. Adrian and I exchanged glances across the dinner table. We'd agreed to answer her questions honestly, but age-appropriately as they came up. I think Daddy was hurt. Yes, I replied carefully, but that doesn't make it okay to hurt other people. When we're in pain, it's our job to find healthy ways to feel better, not to make others feel bad too. Like when I'm sad about Mama and Daddy not living together anymore, I should talk to my counselor instead of being mean to kids at school, she asked. Exactly like that, Adrian said, his voice soft with pride. You're very smart to understand that connection. Watching Emma navigate her parents' divorce with such emotional intelligence was both inspiring and painful. She was learning skills at 8 that her father hadn't mastered until his 30s: how to identify her feelings, express her needs, and take responsibility for her actions without blaming others. She's going to be okay, I told Adrian as we watched her practice soccer in the park. Better than okay. She's going to be the kind of person who breaks cycles instead of perpetuating them. Because of you, he said quietly. Because she has an aunt who models healthy boundaries and emotional intelligence. Because she has someone in her life who survived what I put you through and came out stronger. I thought about that conversation often in the months that followed. Emma was growing up with something I'd never had: adults who prioritized her emotional well-being over their own convenience, who modeled accountability and growth, who taught her that love didn't require perfection or self-sacrifice. She was learning that she had value independent of her usefulness to others, that her thoughts and feelings mattered, that she deserved respect and kindness simply by virtue of being human. Most importantly, she was learning that families could heal, that people could change, that the cycles of hurt didn't have to continue forever. 10 years have passed since Adrian's first phone call asking for help. Emma is 16 now, a confident young woman who plays varsity soccer and writes poetry that makes me cry with its insight and beauty. She knows the full story of our family's dysfunction, not the sanitized version we might have given a younger child, but the honest truth about manipulation, abuse, and the long road to healing. She understands that her father's childhood behavior was unacceptable while also recognizing the growth he's achieved as an adult. I'm proud of my dad for doing the work, she told me recently. But I'm prouder of you for surviving what he put you through and still being willing to forgive him. I didn't forgive him for his sake, I explained. I forgave him for mine and for yours. Carrying that anger was hurting me more than it was hurting him. Emma nodded with the wisdom of someone who has grown up understanding the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, between healing and enabling. She's dating a boy named Marcus, who treats her with the respect and kindness she's learned to expect from relationships. When he raises his voice during a disagreement, she calmly tells him that's not acceptable communication and walks away until he can speak respectfully. She's teaching him how to be better. Adrian marvels. Instead of making excuses for poor behavior or trying to manage his emotions for him, it's a stark contrast to how both of us learn to navigate relationships: me through hypervigilance and people-pleasing, him through manipulation and control. Emma has absorbed the best lessons from our mistakes without having to live through the trauma that taught them. My work with families has expanded to include training programs for therapists, teachers, and child welfare workers on recognizing and addressing sibling abuse. The field is finally beginning to acknowledge that children can be perpetrators as well as victims, that family scapegoating is a form of systematic abuse, and that gender dynamics play a crucial role in how these patterns develop and persist. Boys who learn they can manipulate girls without consequences don't suddenly develop respect for women when they reach adulthood. I tell audiences during my presentations, the entitlement and controlling behaviors that start in childhood become the foundation for domestic abuse, workplace harassment, and systemic misogyny. The response is often defensive parents who insist their sons would never behave that way, professionals who argue that children can't be held responsible for patterns they don't understand. But gradually, minds are changing. People are beginning to see the connections between childhood family dynamics and adult relationship patterns. Adrian attends some of my presentations. sharing his perspective as someone who perpetrated sibling abuse and worked to change. The combination of victim and perpetrator voices is powerful, offering hope for healing while maintaining accountability for harm. I was never held accountable as a child, he tells audiences. I learned that tears and charm could get me out of any consequence, that my comfort mattered more than my sister's safety. That being male meant never having to genuinely apologize for anything. Those lessons nearly destroyed my marriage and my relationship with my daughter. The questions afterward are always similar. How can parents prevent these dynamics? How can professionals recognize the signs? How can families heal after years of dysfunction? The answers are complex, but they start with a simple acknowledgement all children deserve to be believed, protected, and valued equally, regardless of their gender. If you have multiple children, ask yourself honestly whether you're treating them the same. I advise parents. Are you making excuses for one child's behavior while holding the other to a higher standard? Are you teaching one child to be accommodating while teaching the other to expect accommodation? Are you perpetuating the very biases you claim to oppose? The work is difficult and ongoing. Every family we help represents a cycle broken, a future generation protected from the damage that unchecked privilege and unaddressed trauma can cause. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of success is much simpler. Emma Race is growing up knowing she has value, voice, and choice. She's learning to recognize red flags in relationships, to advocate for herself effectively, and to trust her own perceptions even when others question them. She's becoming the woman I might have been if someone had protected me the way we're protecting her. And that, more than any professional recognition or therapeutic breakthrough, feels like redemption. Last week, Emma asked if I regretted not having children of my own. I do have a child, I told her, pulling her into a hug. I have you, and watching you grow into the person you're becoming is the greatest privilege of my life. She hugged me back with the fierce affection of someone who has always known she was loved unconditionally. I'm going to make sure my kids never have to choose between their safety and their family's approval, she said. And if I have boys, I'm going to teach them that girls aren't their emotional support systems or their punching bags. In that moment, I knew our family's story of manipulation and abuse was truly ending. Emma would carry forward the lessons without the trauma, the wisdom without the wounds. She would be the generation that finally got it right. Epilogue. The man their silence raised me to be Adrian is 42 now, a man who measures his success not by trophies or accolades, but by his daughter's emotional health and his own capacity for accountability. He's remarried to a therapist named Sarah, who knew his full history before their first date and still chose to build a life with him. She doesn't enable his old patterns or excuse his past behavior. Instead, she holds him accountable while supporting his continued growth. I needed someone who wouldn't let me slide back into manipulation, he told me when they got engaged. Someone who loves me enough to call me out when I'm being selfish or controlling. Their relationship is built on radical honesty, mutual respect, and the understanding that love isn't about finding someone who completes you, it's about becoming someone worthy of partnership. They're expecting their first child together, and Adrian is both excited and terrified. What if I mess this up? He asked during our last phone call. What if I revert to the old patterns when I'm sleep deprived and stressed? Then you recognize it, apologize, and do better. I replied, the difference between you and our parents is that you're aware of your potential for harm. That awareness is your best protection against repeating it. Our parents remain estranged from both of us. Unable to acknowledge their role in the family's dysfunction, they see Emma occasionally, but the visits are strained and infrequent. She's polite but distant with them, instinctively protecting herself from their attempts to create new dynamics of favoritism and blame. They treat me like I'm special and important, she observed after their last visit. But they talk about you and Daddy like you're both crazy. It makes me uncomfortable. The pattern continues, even with a new generation. But Emma has been immunized against it through education, therapy, and the modeling of healthy relationships. She sees through their manipulation attempts and refuses to participate in the family's traditional scapegoating dynamics. Sometimes I wonder what our childhood might have been like if someone had intervened earlier. If the adults in our lives had recognized and addressed the toxic patterns instead of enabling them. But I've learned that healing isn't about rewriting the past, it's about ensuring the future looks different. Adrian learned to weaponize his male privilege because our culture taught him he could. He learned to manipulate and control because those behaviors were rewarded rather than corrected. He became an abuser because abusing me made him feel powerful and important. But he also learned to change because the consequences of his behavior finally became unbearable. He learned to take accountability because someone he loved was at risk of becoming his next victim. He learned to break cycles of harm because the alternative was losing everything that mattered. I became the man their silence raised me to be, he said recently, echoing my own blog post from years earlier. But I also became the man my daughter needs me to be. And those two men are very different people. The journey from entitlement to empathy isn't easy or comfortable. It requires dismantling beliefs about superiority and power that feel fundamental to identity. It means accepting responsibility for harm without making excuses or demanding forgiveness. Most men never make that journey. They carry their childhood patterns into adult relationships, perpetuating cycles of manipulation and control while convincing themselves they're good guys who would never hurt anyone. Adrian made the journey because the cost of not changing became higher than the comfort of staying the same. Emma will never have to make that same journey because she's learning healthy relationship skills from the beginning. She's growing up knowing that respect is earned through behavior, not demanded through birthright. She's learning that true strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. She's becoming the kind of person who recognizes abuse when she sees it and refuses to participate in systems that perpetuate harm. In the end, that might be the most important lesson of all, that we can choose to be different from the people who raised us, that cycles of harm can be broken, that love doesn't require sacrifice of self or acceptance of abuse. We can choose to see clearly, speak truthfully, and love completely. We can choose to be better, and sometimes that choice changes everything. Adeline Race, LCSW Portland, Oregon, 2024.